All right, guys, how are we all doing?
Yay!
All right, everyone, welcome to the show. This is our second live show that we've done. Thank you all for making it along. And just to prove to everyone listening that we have a live audience in front of us, everyone's going to give me a massive cheer right now. That was good, Daz, right?
Well done,
You like
mate.
that?
Well done.
I didn't think that was going to go down as well as that did.
No.
So that was kind of cool. But great to have you guys here. Thank you so much for coming along. And we are recording now, by the way, guys, so feel free to heckle Daz as much as you want. For those listening, we are at Wildcat in Edinburgh, one of Daz's favourite whiskey haunts. Great wee spot in the heart of Edinburgh, and thank you to Cam for allowing us to take over the bar for the night. Great to be here. We're probably going to sample some of his, I think it's 130 whiskies he's got behind the bar.
he does. Yeah.
So we might sample a few of them afterwards. But before we get into exactly what we're going to do in this episode, I'm going to hand over to the one they call Daz, the man, the myth, the legend, in his own mind, to explain exactly what is going on this evening.
It was almost a compliment there, Mitch. Thank you very much.
Mitch.
Yeah. That's how we start most of our podcast episodes, with me getting an absolute slagging from Mitch. So it's at least you're consistent, sir. Thank you very much. Look, we're very excited about this episode. We have one of the superstars of whiskey with us, and actually there's a few in the room as well, which is very nice. Mr. Deval Gandhi, fabulous whiskey maker. Worked with him in the past over at Macallan, now looking after lakes in many projects. Fabulous to have you along, sir. Mark Thompson, who is the host of our very first live.
Pop-Tart Cherry.
He did, yeah.
I'm still tasting.
In Royal
Pete Allison, whiskey maker over at Woven, of course, as well. It's fabulous to have you along.
No questions from Pete this time, though.
Yeah, no questions from Pete, absolutely. We've got Mitch Beshard, and of course we have the fabulous whiskey writer that is Dave Broom.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Now, Dave's been very gracious with his time. We know you've been very busy.
Gracious.
Yeah, very gallivanting.
The royal family.
I know. Whiskey royalty. I've already told you. You've been travelling around the world and you've managed to squeeze us in, which is fabulous. What we're here to do is we're going to talk about Dave's new book, A Sense of Place, which I know you've been working really, really hard on. We're going to look a little bit into the inspiration of the book, where it came from. Your angle, and we're going to have a few whiskies as we go along, Dave. I hope that's all right. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely perfect to me.
Absolutely brilliant. So tell us just a wee bit about A Sense of Place.
Oh, cool. That's a weird one, really, Daz, because the best way to describe what the book's about is to say what it's not about.
Okay.
So
we need a whiskey, don't
it's
we?
Not a book. It's not a book about business history.
No.
It's not a book about every distillery in Scotland. It's not a book about tasting notes. It's certainly got no bloody scores in it.
Yeah.
It's a book which looks at people, place, community, sustainability, the role that whiskey has played within Scotland. I like the idea of connections. I like looking for connections. And I think as soon as you begin looking at whiskey and stop seeing it as being this thing that exists out with everybody's lives, you know, where does whiskey start? Where does whiskey finish? You know, does it start with a farmer, start with a forester? Is it even further out than that? And I think as soon as you begin looking at that big picture and seeing the connections and looking at what a distillery means to a place, then suddenly you get a different vision of what whiskey has been and what whiskey is becoming again. So that's kind of what it's about.
It's very philosophical.
That sounds like dreadfully pretentious. But there's a lot of kind of big things in there. It was a road trip, essentially. Myself and my great friend Christina Kernahan, who's a phenomenal photographer, went from north to south, went from Orkney to Islay.
Yeah.
So the book is kind of a road trip, really.
Yeah.
But so we had a lot of laughs in the way. So yeah, there's plenty of laughs in there and great pictures.
There are some good pictures in it. That's what I like, and Daz particularly likes that.
That's a guy who can't read. It's quite handy.
So, Dave, let's talk about you, just to rewind a little bit, about you, your kind of background. When we wrote the kind of script, the rough script to this, Daz was like, Dave Broom, whiskey writer from Glasgow. I did a little bit of a better job, I'd like to think, right? So I'm going to do this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, right, Dave? So for those that haven't spent some time with Dave or know his kind of background, he is obviously a drinks writer, journalist, and lover of all things tasty. He's fascinated by people in place and their impact on their favourite tipples. born and educated in Glasgow. You've got a degree in English from Stirling University, right? And then after that, or I don't know if you did this during the degree, but you spent 7 years on Oddbins. Was that right after the degree?
No, that was immediately after it. You know,
Right, so-
who wants to employ an English graduate?
Oh yeah, I was going to say that English thing did really well, right? Like,
from
go work
Glasgow.
on Oddbins for 7 years. So then afterwards, you start. Well, during that time, you're chatting about you were writing about jazz and left field music because you're big into your music as well,
Yeah,
right?
weird stuff.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. And then you moved down to Bristol, where you became a pub landlord.
Yes.
It's kind of cool. Must have been a good time in your life.
That was a really kind of eccentric period in my life.
So the drinks thing is still going on.
Yep.
And then you move into this kind of
I see the
editorial.
urges here, Mitch. You know?
You see this. You move into this editorial piece where you're doing the off-license news, editor of the
Yeah,
off-license
no, I
news.
was
Is that
features
right?
editor of License News
Yeah.
for another 7 years. It's a
7 year thing?
7 year stretch.
I see what's going
the
on
7 year
here.
itch.
Yeah.
You know?
And then it was 1995 when you really started to become a drinks writer
That's when I went
professionally, right?
freelance. I went over to Australia,
Yeah.
worked in some wineries over there, came back and realised there was more opportunities to write about spirits. And you know, 95, you got to think, what was happening then? Single malt was just beginning to take off, bars were just beginning to open, the whole cocktail scene was beginning to happen. And there was hundreds of wine writers, but there was only about 3 people writing about spirits. But there was this whole field that was fascinating to explore. So
Yeah.
I was lucky. I was in the right place at
Well,
the right time.
I don't
basically,
think
you know.
luck has anything to do with it, and you know that's a testament to the awards that you've had. You've been on TV shows numerous. You're now a master keeper of the Quake. We have to bow to you because we're only normal ones. So yeah, and then 2 films as well. Cuba in a Bottle and Amber Light, which
Amber
is
Light.
just out on Netflix. Which
Yes.
is absolutely. Do you guys watch Amber Light yet? You guys like it? Yeah,
Good,
absolutely.
good. Thank you. Yeah, it's been interesting the Netflix thing because people keep sending me screenshots of their Netflix screen because the Netflix algorithm, and it says if you like this film that you've been watching, you might like this. And Amber Light's in there, and it's usually next to zombie movies and vampire movies. So I get a great idea of the demographic of the people who enjoy films about whiskey.
Brilliant.
Yeah, they are zombie lovers.
Should we start drinking?
Why
Yeah,
not?
man, let's do it.
Yeah, we haven't had a dram yet. So we're going to start off with a little bit of Johnny Walker, but we've upgraded you guys. We're going to do some Johnny Walker Gold Label.
Nice.
I think one of the things that we talk about on the show a lot, Dave, is blends and their place within Scotch whisky, and I think they're overlooked by a lot of single malt drinkers. What do you think? What's your opinion on that?
No, I agree. I love blends. I love blending. I love blenders. The Scotch whisky industry would be nowhere if it wasn't for blends. That's a simple fact. These distilleries would not exist if it wasn't for blends. So a huge amount of time for them. I think they're versatile, they're complex, they tell incredible stories. I mean, people should drink more blends. They're just brilliant.
People should drink more blends.
And we've got great blenders in the room here tonight.
Yes, we do. And that's
We
one
have
of the
Jota
things.
Tanaka from Japan.
Yeah.
Come up here specially, just for this event.
It's a long way to come. We'll put the Fuji whiskies in later, I'm sure. Yeah.
But Gold's great. I'm a big fan of Johnny Walker Gold. It's a really weird thing that if you look at Red Label tastes kind of red. It's all kind of spicy. And black tastes black for its dark fruits. And gold tastes gold. It's all that kind of sumptuous, soft, gentle vanilla and golden fruit. Green tastes very green. The whole thing falls
fresh,
down.
right?
The whole thing falls down with blue, right enough. But up until that point,
They almost got it right.
they always got it right. Yeah. King George V smells of King George V. That's an absolute fact. That was the brief.
Yeah.
I mean, the blends are bizarrely underrated in this country, but I think it's beginning to change.
Yeah.
And I think the opening of the big Johnny Walker experience in Princess Street
Where is that?
will help that.
Is it?
It's a wee thing on the corner.
A wee shop, isn't it?
It's a wee shop. Yeah. You'd walk past it.
I would.
you wouldn't notice
I
it.
can't see that high anyway. That's probably why. But look, we normally when we read whiskey books, and there's lots of whiskey writers. We can come on to some of your inspirations and some of your peers who you look at and things like that. But we always look at tasting notes and fermentation times. How many stills were at that distillery and things like that. You've avoided a lot of that.
Aye.
In a sense of place, and that's why we've kind of started with a blend actually, because we don't really need to go into all of that kind of detail. It's much more about the stories of the individuals, what impact they had, not just on the distilleries, but the cultures that they existed within. When we talk about Kilmarnock, of course, where you're from, and the story with walkers and things. And the blends play a big part in that, don't they, in terms of a sense of place? It's not just about single malt distilleries.
No. It was an interesting chapter, that, because I wanted to get blends in there, and I was kind of asking myself, if this works, if it can show that blends can also have a sense of place, then I think that's the job. Well, not a job done, but I think the argument holds. And you look at the way that the blends were set up in the 19th century, and you look at the style of Walker. Walker's signature was based around West Coast whiskies, because you think of transport in those days. And why was Chivas style established in the way it was? Because it was closer to the Speyside whiskies, which even in those days tended to be slightly lighter. So there was, even in the 19th century, this idea that there was this regional style beginning to develop within blends itself. And I interviewed Jim Beveridge and Emma Walker for the book, and asking them about their idea, and they were going, well, a blend is actually a blend of Scotland. A blend is a blend of all these distilleries, which in their own right have this idea of a place, of being this character you can only get from this one particular community. Yeah. And that's what blending is about. Blending is about bringing all of that together. So there's wonderful kind of metaphors there.
Yeah. It has changed though, hasn't it, blends, when you think about it? I mean, if you went up to Perth as a good example, right, old blending town.
Sure.
Once upon a time I worked for Edrington, famous grouse, but the blending had gone away from there by that point. But you felt that at a point in time, probably in the 50s, 60s and 70s, these towns which were home to these blends, the blends were really important to the area, to the town itself, not just where it was being consumed, where it was being made. It was massive.
I absolutely. Most of my family were from Perth, and I would go up to Perth and the Glasgow Fair or holidays or whatever, and I'd meet my cousins on Dewars Corner, and we'd go to the Bells shopping centre, Bells Sports Centre, and in Glasgow, you kind of navigated your way by warehouses and whiskey, and it was just all around you in those days, and there was that kind of wider sense that the whiskey was part of the fabric of the town, because it was given such great employment. Kilmarnock would be a great example of that, So, and that began to kind of disappear, and that was also one of the questions, that as the whiskey industry got bigger and perhaps more centralised and more branded, was this idea of an identity to a specific place, was that getting diluted, or was that kind of getting frayed? So that was a challenge to see, if that was the case, or whether it was actually coming back. Yeah. I think it's now coming back again, but we'll come to that.
Yeah, but that's the emotional roller coaster, if you like, of it all, exactly. And that's what you're very much focused on. It's less the rational stuff, much more the emotional stuff, which is, yes. But it's good. I like it. Yeah. And you can't get it wrong, which is important.
Yeah, well,
as a man who studied English, it's about interpretation.
Well, I did actually have to pull myself up at one point. I think it was I was heading west, and we were heading west into the peninsulas. And I realised, I was writing the first draft of the chapter, and there was way too much Gaelic poetry in there. There was an awful lot of Gaelic poetry, which I love. Not being a Gaelic speaker, but I do love 18th century Gaelic poetry. It's great. Yeah. Trust me. It's relevant to the great story, the kind of forgotten story of whiskey.
Yeah.
Which kind of came out of a lot of the work that Arthur and I have been doing for Antiquarian. It's
a good plug, by the way.
It's a great plug. Yeah. Another rival.
No, we don't do videos.
We talk about whiskey history, and the whiskey history kind of starts with 1823, and before that, it's all this kind of romantic, smuggly stuff, which wasn't that romantic. It was probably hellish, But before that, it's like Dark Ages. Nothing happened. But actually, there's like 200, 300 years of whiskey making that's going on there, and the only way you can find out about that is by looking at not whiskey texts, because nobody's writing whiskey books, but they were writing poetry, and they were singing songs, and they were telling stories. So it's all there, and it's all in Gaelic, So this completely forgotten world of whiskey, which was destroyed with the Highland clearances, and was changed, and probably for the better, with the growth of the modern whiskey industry. But all of that's been lost. So there was a lot of Gaelic poetry that I had to kind of rein back on.
I think on that subject, Dave, like talking about inspiration, when you write a book, I think this is your 35th book now. Is that right? There's my researcher over there that told me.
It's 14th. Yeah.
14th
this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where does that inspiration come from, and what does the inside of Dave Broom's mind look like when he writes a book? Is it a scary place? Is it something that we want to know about? Or
it's a profoundly scary place.
How do you go about setting out, when you start writing a book?
I mean, this idea's kind of been rattling about in my brain for about 10 years or so. Right. And in some ways it led into Amber Light, but this book isn't the book of the film kind of thing. But, this idea of whiskey being a cultural product rather than, as I said, this thing that sits out with our lives, it's part of our lives. So it's been kind of rattling around there for a wee while. So I suppose that's where inspiration came from. And in terms of whiskey, it was talking to distillers. Essentially, my job is just talking to people and asking them why, and then writing down the answers. It's as simple as that. So it's asking people like Jim Beveridge or Emma or any of the great distillers out there, Jota, all the great distillers. Why? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Not the what, but the why. I'm really interested in. And this idea of connections, this idea of, that whiskey is a manifestation of this place and of the conditions. The reason that Scotland makes whiskey is because of its geology and its climate. That means that barley can grow, and because barley can grow, you can make beer, and because beer can be made, you can distill it. It's why we kicked off in Orkney, and why we kicked off in the Neolithic. Not that they were distilling, but whiskey's story, for me, starts with somebody consciously putting a seed of barley into the ground in Orkney, for example.
I've worked with some of the guys.
And they're still there.
You would think they were from the Neolithic, to be honest.
They're still there. Yeah. I know, but there you have it, and they're there, and they're settled, and they're sitting down, and they've built a settlement, a town, a city even, Nessa Brodgar. They're doing art, they're brewing, they live there, sense of place, and that's where whiskey's coming from. So that's what I wanted to write about. But yeah, in the process of writing, it gets fairly tangled up in there. So that there's, I'm not looking at whiskey history. I'm looking at all these other things. So there's lots of untangling.
And on that point,
being done.
After watching Amber Light and reading Sense of Place, there seems to be quite a bit of similarity within the two. So which came first?
The idea of Sense of Place came first.
Okay.
Then I was kind of chatting around this idea to Adam, who's the director of Amber Light, and we decided to make the film. And so the film was kind of looking at the role that whiskey's played in Scottish culture. So that was the angle there. And off the back of that, I had then written a book about Japanese whiskey, which Jota very kindly helped with, which was looking at what makes Japanese whiskey Japanese and the connections between the mindset of a Japanese distiller and blender and the mindset of a Japanese artist, because there's really fascinating parallels between the two. And the publisher quite liked it. The book did okay. And they went, well, we'd quite like another one. I went, well, I've got this idea for a book about Scotch that I've been kind of punting to you for the past 10 years. Can I please do it now? And lo and behold, that's what happened. Yeah.
Fantastic.
How's the Johnny Walker Gold going down? It is nice, isn't it?
It's a gorgeous dram.
This is one of the old ones that Mitch stole from Diageo back in the day. So it was.
Actually, I think we both stole it. It was like a secret stash that we had, but you just drunk yours quicker.
After the Johnny Walker Championships, there was always a few cases went to the side. It's the old 18-year-old gold label. Yeah. And back then they used to credit, and you'll probably know more about this, but back then they used to credit Clynelish as being the heart of Johnny Walker Gold, which is where this lovely waxy kind of mouth coating sensation seems to come from. But yeah, it very much does remind you of what you would think a whiskey, if it was to be presented in gold, would kind of taste like. Mellow, no edges, nice medium finish.
Blend.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Should we move on to the next dram?
Yes.
So the next one's going to be second tier. We're going to go left to right. I know some of you guys were struggling with that. Not looking at anyone in particular.
I can see Stu's face. Two hands.
So Dave, we're going to move on to a bit of Rassi, which I know you've done a little bit of work with, and you talk about this in the book as well. So you want to take us through this and what these guys are doing here and how it relates to the book?
Yeah, Rassi. I've been lucky enough to go up to Rassi, kind of since it opened, really. And it's an extraordinary story, and the story of Rassi and other whiskies which we're going to have later, like Nain and what's happening in Harris, etc., are just amazing stories. And the wider story is one that needs to be kind of explained and talked about and celebrated, because Razi, you had an island which has been depopulated, ageing population, no careers for the kids. Same with Torrevieja, you know, any kind of Western Isles, you know, or mainland. Distillery comes along, all of a sudden, boom, there's jobs and there's careers. And because of that, that ripples out, because then tourists come in and there's, you know, there can be a hotel, there can be craft, the kids can stay, families can stay, the school stays open, the doctor's surgery remains open and stuff. Suddenly the community benefits from the fact that a distillery exists in this place. And that is a really, really powerful thing to begin to understand, that it's not just this place making whiskey. It's actually a hub for an entire community, you know, an entire area. Especially in part of Scotland that has been suffering from ludicrous levels of underinvestment. You know, you're getting serious for a minute. That you know, the fact that there are these distilleries opening up in Skye and Razi and Harris and Ardnamurchan and Morven, etc., is really, really important. Really important to Scotland. And the fact they're making amazing whiskey is even better. You know, and the way they're doing it, and the freedom of thought and the freedom of expression that's taking place in these new distilleries is just absolutely joyous. You know, so it's great to go back to Razi every year just to see how things are progressing.
Yeah, the new distilleries in these areas are really important, aren't they? And it is what I'm really curious about is what happens to them. Do they become established single malt whiskey brands? Do they become part of modern blends? You know, at what point does a Rassy become part of a Johnny Walker Black Label, say? You know, and that's going to evolve over time. And you know, I'm always curious to know from a blender's point of view, when do these new distilleries become great tools for them to build, the established blends?
It's an interesting one, that does, actually, because I think the difference is that the model in the past was that a distillery existed to serve as a blend. So there's very, very few which actually said, right, actually our entire production is just going into single malt. But all the new distilleries who are opening up are making single malt.
Yeah.
And as a result, there's a freedom of thought, you know, so they're not making a specific style because the blender wants them to go, right, that's your character, fine, stick that, that's what we're going to be buying. They can go, whee!
Yeah.
We can do whatever we want, you know, we can find our style, and we are a single malt, and we are restricted by our size, and that's not a problem. Yeah. We're just going to make the best whiskey that we can, and have that kind of joyous freedom of ability to make great whiskey. And I think that's what's happening at Razi. So I don't see them becoming part of the whole kind of fillings thing, which is important.
There are others that are, right? I mean, I'm sure Borders Distillery and guys
Borders
like that.
doing, Inchdairney are doing it, but also keeping back their own for their own.
Yeah.
But you know, these guys are saying, no, this is what we're doing. Boom. Thank you very much. You know?
There's a nice sweetness to it, isn't there?
It's a really.
I think this drink's a lot older than it actually is.
Yeah, it's a really it's a complex mix. It's peated and unpeated spirit, and you know, 3 different types of cask, and you know, different levels of blending between them all. Mark.
Years ago, when new distilleries were just starting, take something like English Whisky Company, they were aiming to produce a spirit that they knew in 10 years' time would mellow out to be a great draft. Do you see a change now of younger distilleries not encumbered by that, where they're producing spirit to drink right now, even though it's at 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old? Whereas in the past, I think, personally working with a lot of distilleries back then, 15 years ago, that were just opening up, they were almost apologetic at releasing something because they're like, well, you know, it's got to give it 8 years and it'll be where we want it to be. Whereas I think something like Rassy and Torrevieja and a lot of the Ardnamurchans, they're using casks now to create those spirits that are drinkable and approachable and you know, really worthy of praise.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all. You know, and it's a very conscious commercial decision. You know, enough is known about how whiskey is made and then matures. You know, that if you need to get your product out relatively quickly for financial reasons, you know, and you're careful about the casks you choose, and you still produce something which is complex and interesting and balanced, and not just, you know, overwhelmed by wood, you can do it at a young age. what's going to be really interesting, in talking to Alistair at Razzie, is what's going on in the refill casks, which he's really excited about. So behind all of this, which is coming out as young whiskey, these casks are emptied, but they're getting refilled, and so there's a long-term plan as well. So it's not just, but we're only going to be doing it in young whiskey. I think some distilleries might just continue to do young whiskies, but I know it's certainly in Razzie's case, that they can play a number of different tunes on it. But I agree 100%. A lot of it comes from just greater understanding of wood. Yeah. I mean, you look what Duval has been doing at Lakes. Astounding whiskies coming out at young age because of that understanding of wood and the way that you can use wood, not for wood's sake, but actually from a flavour point of view. That's fascinating. And actually, just picking up on that, picking up on my own point.
Keep going, Dave, keep going.
Fascinating point, this.
You want to get a check for yourself, mate?
Well, thank you very much, yes. There we go. I can't even remember what I was going to say now.
Yeah. But I was just going to add to what you said, because going back to that sense of place, you talk about lakes, it's a couple of things. That I was at Stowning 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Great example of that.
Aye.
They've made a style of spirit, fruity, quite bold, matures quickly, 4 or 5 years, 6 years maybe. They don't really have any interest in maturing beyond that because they don't have to, right? I mean, the style of whiskey they're producing, and it makes me think of Dr. Gin Swan. Yeah. I mean, when he was helping distilleries, he's not here anymore, unfortunately, but when he was helping distilleries, one of the things that was kind of his fingerprint that you could tell he'd been there was fruity, well-maturing spirit, fast-maturing spirit that dealt well at 4 and 5 years old and actually tasted brilliant. And you could be mistaken for thinking that's a 10-year-old thing from a more established distiller,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Jim's influence was huge. I have remembered what I was going to say there, but which is, I think distillers have got a much wider view now. So in the past, Scotch whisky was guilty. Not guilty, because it was essentially the only big whisky industry in the world of just being inward looking. So that was the model, that was the paradigm, this is what we have to do, because this is what we've always done for like 100 years. But I think the new distillers are now going, well, what's happening in Denmark? What's happening in Japan? What about all these techniques? This idea that there's Scotch and then there's everybody else is not only hugely patronising, it's just not true. Scotch is just part of this thing called the world of whiskey. And I think you're looking at, you talk to a lot of the new Scotch distillers, and they're using techniques which are not out of place in Japan.
Yeah.
So there's this greater kind of cross-fertilisation across the world. Sorry, you interrupted.
I was just going to ask, how old is it?
4 or 5.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think probably the other thing is improvement in the technology of distillation, so you can control the distillate to a much more finer, have a much more finer control on the distillate to get what you want to get, which allows you the wood to do half the work. You don't have to have a sulfury, meaty, big spirit with a lot of impurities or a lot of congeners that you want to take it out. If you try to manage it in the beginning through a distillate, all you have to do is just use the wood in the right way to get the flavor and complexity you require. So I think there's a big development in the technology and the way we use those technologies for distillation as well as the wood.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Deval. And it's interesting, talking to Alistair at Razzie, he's saying that, as far as he knows, he's a very humble guy. I mean, but as far as he knows, Razzie is the first distillery that was designed by a blender. So there's lots of bells and whistles there. There's lots of levers that he can pull. Cooling jackets that can be on or off, changing reflux, etc., etc. Purifier pipes off or on. So you can make all these different flavors. So you can be blending. The whole distillery is set up to do that, which I think is fascinating. So again, we're back to blends.
Yeah, back to blends and going back to the past. Hindsight's wonderful. So new distillers have that. They have the benefit of that, and certainly the new distilleries do. But as we move on to our third whiskey, a distillery that has a lot of heritage and history, which is Highland Park.
Aye.
And you like Highland Park, and I know it's a distillery that you're very fond of. Great whiskey, always. What's your sort of ideas when it comes to the older distilleries, and your book you talk a little bit about a few of them as well, Highland Park being one of them.
Being the first one.
Being the
Drop
first.
that in right at the start, don't you?
Yeah. We started up top, so it was good to get, that idea of, the Neolithic in the past and, Highland Park. I think there's also something about the physicality of Highland Park, the design of it, it just seems to have been there forever, and it just kind of sits there on top of the hill like some sort of weird medieval town, and it's, and it's not been planned. It's a complete unplanned distillery. We need another building. It's just kind of, it's all over the shop, and I love it for that. I know one of the guys that took us around, Alan, sort of said, "Have you been here before?" And I went, "Yeah, I've been here a few times." And he said, "When was the first time?" I said, long time ago, 80s or 90s. Or something. He said, "Has anything changed?" I went, "No." He went, "Good." And there's a positive side to that and a negative side to that, but I think it's important for these distilleries. They have a distillery character, they have a distillery style, and that is what they do, and that is what they do brilliantly. It can change, it can adjust, it can be tweaked, but it is Highland Park. And it was interesting talking to the guys that as it's got bigger, and I think it was a really important point that they felt, and this is the guys who are living there, they felt that it was becoming separated from the town. That people in Orkney drank Scapa, not Highland Park, and they were kind of the distillery on the hill, and the tourists bought it, but it wasn't, it kind of ceased to be the Orcadian whiskey. And they're doing a lot of work to actually try and re-establish connections with the community again, which I thought was really heartening, because it's quite easy, I think, for a distillery to suddenly become big and impersonal and a global brand, but actually lose a degree of integrity. But that's what they're trying to do. It was great. It's a fantastic still.
Got a question?
I was just going to ask this whole about the distilleries doing their own thing and perhaps experimenting. I mean, I know Glenfiddich is doing some experimental series, and Lindors is doing different casks. Do you think that's really the distilleries saying we want to try new things, or do you think they're answering a demand in whiskey drinkers wanting something more creative? Is it more a chicken or an egg?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I think the Scotch whisky industry has woken up to the fact that there are a lot of great whiskies being made around the world. It's not difficult to make good whiskey. You shouldn't be making bad whiskey. So I think there is. I was speaking to I was speaking with Emma Walker last week, and she was saying that. And again, I think it was something that Jim Beveridge had told her. That 1820s, like the building of the Scotch whisky industry, the rest of the 19th century was kind of the age of technology and industrialization, and the building of plant and engineering coming in. And then kind of from the 50s on was the era of science, where science came in and began to pull whiskey apart and understand what the chemical reactions were and everything else. And she was saying that we're now at the start of a new era of whiskey, because all of that is understood. And now I think there's a sense of freedom to some extent, that we've got all the information, we've got all the technical stuff, we've got all the scientific stuff. We can play. Almost kind of that's at the back of the mind. We can now play. I think that is very much the mindset of a new generation of distillers around the world, and certainly in Scotland as well. So some of it's coming from the distillery. I think some is coming from consumer demand as well. But as long as it's not just a kind of copy. It's got, they've done that. We need to do that as well, because you can't do that with whiskey, because even if it's young, it still takes time, and by the time your 3-year-old whiskey that was answering that consumer demand 3 years ago is out, that's gone. Everybody's drinking something else. No, come back. So I think again there has to be an understanding of what the flavours are going to be, and there has to be long-term thinking about it. But I think there's a greater degree of creativity and creative thinking in Scotch whisky. Certainly, in my 30-odd years in the trade, I haven't seen it. I'm not as excited. I've never been as excited. That's probably a better way of putting it. There's a lot of really good stuff happening.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. 100%.
Yeah.
So I guess a similar question. New distilleries producing some really interesting, cool stuff, but there are still legislative constraints around, Scotch whisky production. are there any elements of Scotch whisky production that you think could be relaxed or changed in a way that would open up the playing field even wider?
Yeah, it's a good question, Stu. But I think if you look, again, it comes back to that old mindset that the industry kind of believed that the laws were restrictive. Oh, no, we can't do that. Well, the regulations say we can't do that. Oh, no, we can't do that. And you look at the regulations and there's loads of flex. The regulations don't say you can only use one type of yeast. The regulations, they don't dictate about a whole manner of there doesn't, you can't use different roasts of barley. Of course you can. There's lots of things that can be used. You can use rye, you can use different grains. And it was just this, oh no, we can't do it. We've just got to keep, the good ship Scotch or the good train. I think it's more of a train than a ship. Yeah, it's more of a train than a ship. A ship can deviate a bit. A train, boom, we've got to keep that train heading straight down, straight down those tracks, Yeah. But whereas now I think distillers are going, oh, there is that flex. And the legislation is really important. And we won't get into legislation, jot it honestly. But the legislation is really important. But there is flex. Is there one thing I would change? Yeah. Probably oak,
Yeah, would you like to see some of these chestnut casks being used again?
Yeah. Using other types of wood, I think would be interesting. Other than that, if you look at the rest of the world, the rum industry, desperate to try and bring in legislation. Other whiskey industries desperate to or trying to bring in legislation. Everybody looks to Scotch whisky. The American single malt, rules that are about to go into law, they look to the SWA regulations. Everybody looks at it as being the gold standard, So I think we should stop kicking it, to be honest, because it's a good piece of work. It's annoying sometimes, but it's a good piece of work.
They're in town tonight. We should go pitchforks.
Yeah.
There we go.
Kind of moving on to something that we do on the show all the time is we're going to talk about what's happening in the news within whiskey. Do you want to do a little drum roll, Dave?
Should we do it?
Thank you very much. So one of the things that's just around the corner as we record this is David Stewart, MB, is about to do 60 years with Balvenie, which is incredible. I know you and I have spent a bit of time with David. Obviously, Mark Thompson in the room has as well, but incredibly humble guy. There's going to be some celebrations for him, so there's going to be a big tasting for him at Whiskey Show, and then I know there's something going down in London for his 60th as well. But absolutely incredible, like 60 years with the same brand.
Yeah, incredible man. What a genuinely lovely man. He is. Insanely modest.
No, he's unbelievable. I still remember one of the nights going out with him and having quite a few drinks. I think we finished the night with some tequilas. And then he's like 8 o'clock in the morning, we're doing breakfast. I'm like, all right, David, no problem. Rocks up, suited, booted, just like he'd never been out, Still got it.
Yeah, still got it. I remember during COVID, I'd gone through the sample room at White and Mackay, and Mr. Patterson, of course, was due to be there, so I was meeting up with him, and he forgot to tell me that he actually had an engagement in the office already. So I go in at about 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon when everyone's meant to be at home, hiding away from COVID and everything like that, especially Richard, being in his 70s at the time. And I go up, and him and David Stewart are in the room, thousands of samples out in front of them. All right, Darryl, sorry, I forgot to tell you, we've changed the time. And David Stewart's like, how are you doing, son? I'm like, oh, it's nice to see. I'm like, we're not even meant to be shaking hands here. We're not even meant to be in the same room. But there, they two are making their own rules, just seeing what's happening, But amazing, guys, it's the energy they have. Despite the decades of service they've got, they're still so passionate. Every day they're in first, probably last out. Give us time, make sure we're not making big mistakes and stuff. So it's always good.
No, they're amazing. I remember doing tastings with David, and him bringing out some, astounding Balvenies and stuff. It's incredible. You're effusive about, all these tasting notes suddenly babbling out, and he goes, aye, it's quite nice.
So true.
One of the other things, William Grant's related actually, is of course the Perpetual Time series as well. So we've got some very rare and special Glenfiddichs coming out these days, which is really exciting. I'm not just saying that because Mark Thompson's in the room.
I was going to say, it's almost like it's sponsored by William Grant. What's going on here?
But it's brilliant news. I mean, I think we've seen Glenfiddich do some brilliant things, especially over the last 10 or 15 years, I think. Really enjoyed a lot of the brilliant work that's gone into maybe slightly lower price points, but great to see some cool stuff going on at the higher price points.
The packaging for all that is just incredible. The 50-year-old, like that, it's recycled aluminium.
Yeah, it looks cool.
Just absolutely insane.
So, did you bring the samples back from London?
No, mate, I didn't. I drank them all. Sorry.
That sounded it. Thanks, mate.
Well, you always drink all your samples and never share, so.
That's very true. Yeah.
I'm glad I'm sitting here.
I know. Pull me back. It's like a marriage counsellor. And the last thing, I suppose, in the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks we saw, and it's an interesting one because it kind of divides opinion, is the Macallan Horizon bottling, which is in partnership with Bentley, who is their kind of strategic partner now, and we've seen that being executed on a couple of ways so far, but this will probably be the biggest way that they wear this piece on their sleeve. So Horizon really being the inspiration, the limitations and things like that, and a bottle that doesn't stand up, it actually lies down, which is quite unusual. I haven't held it, haven't seen a final prototype as yet, and I certainly haven't tried a sample, but if anyone has, feel free to tell us how it is.
Amazing.
Yeah, I suspected that reaction, Mr. Broom. Is it?
Are you saying that Macallan is going to be like a bottle of Iron Brew? But what do you think of that, Dave? Like this collaboration with whiskey and sort of luxury partnerships?
It's an interesting area, and it's, whiskey is playing in that ballpark now, and there are people with lots of money who want to buy expensive whiskies, and that's great. And I don't mind it.
Mitch is one of them.
Mitch is, definitely. Mark Thompson's one of them.
Yeah.
I don't mind it. The whiskey's playing in there. Why shouldn't whiskey play in there? What concerns me is whether that area, which is a small, rarefied element within the world of whiskey, suddenly begins to influence the rest of it. So, all the attention is paid towards that, and that then affects prices and et cetera. It's an interesting and esoteric area that kind of exists under its own rules, but it shouldn't be the tail that's wagging the dog of the whiskey industry. The whiskey industry is still built by Glenfiddich 12.
Yeah. Nice.
Again, not sponsored by William Grant.
Jeez, oh man, hey. See what happens when you turn up to stuff. We do your job for you.
Mark Thompson's now banned from any of these.
Well, look, we've tried we've tried one new player, and we've tried a couple of old ones. Johnny Walker and Highland Park being two of the more established producers. The last whiskey that we're going to taste tonight is Ardnamurchan. And I think Ardnamurchan's a really interesting story. Again, Adelphi is a great independent bottler, and this is really one of the consequences of them doing a really good job on bottling some fantastic whiskies. So I think one of the things we do with people like Adelphi, Gordon and MacPhail, is we trust them to not only pick great casks and put them into the bottle. I think we trust them to make great whiskey as well, because ultimately that's probably why they got into it. So Ardnamurchan is one of those that, again, you go back to a sense of place, and we'll go back to the West Coast, from the North Isles all the way back down to the Western Peninsula of Scotland, to a really special place, and a distillery, again, that will have a huge impact on the community around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the green credentials of it, the biomass boiler, using trees, using wood chip from trees grown on the estate, and then there's a replanting programme going on, and the draft feeding the cows in the estate, etc. The barley coming from Alex's farms in Fife. So everything is a wonderful circle and production restricted to the size that they are. They cannot make any more, because if they wanted to make any more, that would be broken. They would have to bring in fuel, etc., and that's not what they're about. And it's just bloody great whiskey, and that's the point. It's just fantastic West Coast whiskey. It's got that dirtiness to it in the nicest possible way. And,
what do you mean by that, Dave?
For example, it's got that kind of Campbelltonian, grit and oiliness to it.
Yeah, it's a slightly sootiness, isn't it?
Yeah, and that kind of salty, briny thing, which they don't know where it's coming from, but it's there. Again, peated, unpeated, blended together, kind of Japanese technique rather than a Scottish one. It just, it came out of the blocks just boom.
Yeah.
As
Yeah, I remember going there a while back and just being all completely blown away with what they were doing there.
Yeah. And again,
Such a cool
the same thing about community. Really establishing a community or re-establishing a community in a place where. A lot of people move to Ardnamurchan, because it's quiet.
Yeah, they move to retire, not to work.
Yeah. So,
you have to pick your retirement spot really wisely, just in case a wee distillery pops up, and then all of a sudden it's a boom village.
Yeah, Mr. Bean living just down the road. I shouldn't have told you that.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's true.
There we go. Yeah.
So,
interesting people.
Dave, let's talk about go back to the book for a second.
Aye.
When is this out?
It's out on the 29th of September.
And everyone can buy it in any reputable bookshop, online,
and probably
Amazon.
disreputable bookshops as well. Yes, you buy it online, through your usual online people. Independent bookstores, will support them wherever possible. There's an audio book coming out.
Nice.
I spent 2 days locked in a room reading my own text, which was hell. Especially when there's a glossary as well at the back of the book, because there's kind of technical terms. There's a lot of Scottish words. I suddenly realised there's lots of Scottish words, and it took me ages to get through the whole glossary. But it was like, three. Yeah, it was great.
Right.
It was hilarious. Yeah.
All right,
That's the problem with a podcast. It doesn't come with subtitles, unfortunately. Yeah.
So, mate, moving away from the book, we're going to do a quick fire round on you. Now, we kind of told you what we're going to roughly do tonight, but we didn't tell you the quick fire round questions.
No, you
so
didn't.
this is going to be off the cuff. You have to answer these in 4 words or less.
Jesus, is
All
that
right,
possible?
that's it. Yeah, well, I know it's going to be tough, man, but you're going to have to try.
I'll do my best.
You have to dig deep.
Yeah.
All right, so quick fire round. Let's go. What would you be doing if you weren't writing shite about booze?
I'd write and shout about music.
Solid. All right. If you weren't in Edinburgh with us right now, in Scotland, you could go somewhere right now. Where would you go?
Kyoto.
Oh, nice. Okay, fair enough. That's far away. Okay. Where's that?
As far away from you as possible.
I don't blame you, man. I don't blame you.
Teleport to any distillery out with Scotland. Where would you go?
Aurora, Northern Norway.
Who would you rather go on holiday with, me or Mitch?
Oh.
I give good massages, by the way.
You do. I can answer
Why don't you
that.
tell everyone that?
Mitch waxes his back.
I know I'd go on holiday with both of you.
Oh, there you go. Very PC. Favourite whiskey writer, excluding Charlie McLean?
Oh, that's a good question. Lou Bryson.
Okay.
Oh, nice. All right. Marooned on a Scottish island with a case of fine whiskey for the rest of your days. Who would you have with you, and not your family?
And they can be
not
not your family.
and they can be dead or alive.
Yeah.
Oh, grief. Oh, dear me.
Not Barry Wilson either.
Definitely not.
No,
Barry
no.
Wilson.
Spent enough time with him.
Just because it's in my mind, I would probably go for Neil Gunn. I think that would be hilarious. That'd be good. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, guys, that kind of brings us to the end of what we're going to ask you. But I don't know, you guys have had some great questions already. I don't know if there's any other questions from the floor that anyone wants to ask Dave.
When you were travelling on your road trip, was there one particular moment that will remain with you, whether it's part of the writing of the book or not? But when you travel across Scotland with a purpose to search these senses of place out, was there anything that happened? What's the standout memory that you'll think, if I wasn't on that trip, that wouldn't have happened, and I won't have that memory locked away?
Yeah, I think it wasn't really a whiskey one. It was when Christina and I were in Harris, and we were down in Luskintyre. We were about to interview Donald John Mackay, who's an incredible weaver, and we were just doing some photos. Well, she was doing some photos on the beach. We were just out there on the beach, and this storm was coming in, and it was just ridiculous. And she just screamed, well, Christina, she just screamed with laughter, kicked off her shoes, ran into the ocean, began snapping away. And you could just see in half, no word of a lie, in the photos in the book, half of the landscape was black and the other half was lit bright green and yellow and blue. And it was just like, Jesus Christ, what is happening? And that for me, that I will never forget that moment. And also later in that trip, again with Christina, a rainbow suddenly appeared because of the weather and stuff. She almost crashed the car. Rainbow! So we had a lot of kind of amazing times. But yeah, it was those kind of non-whiskey bits of just laughing that came out. Staying for a weekend in a midge-infested castle in Ardnamurchan with Alex Bruce and family was just incredible. Yeah, this kind of moth-eaten castle, it was hilarious. I've never seen so many midges. You kind of cleared the sink of them in the morning. All the every surface was covered in dead midge bodies every morning, and this strange old deerhound. So we just kind of wandered about like the ghost of some ancient retainer, and she was just kind of lugubriously wandering through these echoing corridors and pissing on the carpet. That's what I remember.
That's no way of speaking about Alec Bruce, is it?
Yeah.
So do you find that the new distilleries have the same transportative effect as some of the more historical ones? Because they don't have that same history. So I'm thinking Talisker and Skye immediately transports that to bonfires on the beach or wherever it may be. Do the new distilleries have that same effect for you?
I think they do. I think some of them do. I think when you taste, again in Skye, if you taste Torrevig, boom, you are there. You're there right in the seashore, getting drowned in sea spray. I think you're getting it with Ardnamurchan as well. So yeah, it is. There's this weird thing with distilleries that they do what they want to do. They'll be set up. We're talking about levers and pulling levers. You can set up a distillery to do what you want it to do, and it will kind of go, yeah, I'm going to do it slightly differently, and it's unpredictable. And from a super geeky point of view, and I had this big conversation because there is geeky bits in the book as well as Gaelic poetry. Dead midges, but speaking with Stuart, who was at Brora at that point, talking about colonies of lactobacillus, and each distillery has its own distinct colony of lactobacillus, and that is really important in fermentation, and that could be a signature, of that distillery. That could affect flavour. It might affect flavour, might not. Might affect flavour. A lot of research going into that super geeky area. There's a sense of place, and so yes. The environment does play a part. So, yeah, I look forward to these distilleries. And I think they're conscious of it. And you could force it, or you could just let it happen.
Look, thank you all for coming down. Thanks to those who are listening. A great wee tasting. A wee hop, skip and a jump from all different parts of Scotland. We went right the way up to Orkney, we went out to Rassay, down to Ardnamurchan, and Johnny Walker. So we've been to the northeast in Clynelish, all the way through the rest of wherever those whiskies have come from, and that old Johnny Walker gold label, which was really nice. But stay tuned for future episodes. We've got much more to come, Mitch and I. This little hobby of ours, which started just as an excuse for us to have a couple of drams on a Tuesday night, has snowballed into something a little bit more committed than that, to the point where we have people like yourself, Dave, joining us, which is very, very, very nice. And it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, it's been an absolute treat. I've really, really enjoyed it. And thanks to all 300 of you for coming out.
It's 312, Dave. 312.